let's start the event. Again, a very good morning, good afternoon, or evening from whichever part of the world you're attending the webinar from. Firstly, I'm impressed with the turnout considering GDPR is a relatively new concept and most of the world is still grappling with what it means and how this is going to impact our businesses. I'm happy to see a lot of our customers from Malaysia, Indonesia, India, of course, UAE, and Europe in the webinar. For us, you are the best example of folks who embrace change and work towards using this change effectively. Thank you for joining the event. Before I get started, some ground rules. Uh, One is the communication will be from our side to you, so you will not be able to talk on the mic. However, if you have any technical difficulties or you want to ask a question, you can go right on top of your screen and either raise your hand or use the chat to ask questions. We will make sure that all of your questions are answered either during the event or after the event. And we will also make sure that this entire presentation is available to you on our website that you can download and use for further reference. Yeah, with that, let's kickstart the event. Yeah, my name is Deepak Marvin Kurve, and I'm the founder and CEO of KePSLA. As many of you would know, we work with over 2,500 hotels in India, APAC, Middle East, and Europe, and provide them world-class data to effectively manage and enhance their guest experience. In today's event, we are partnering with Wazir and their team of legal experts to simplify the noise around GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulation, and answer some of these simple questions uh, around what is General Data Protection Regulation, how is that going to impact the Indian hospitality industry? And when I say Indian, I also mean the rest of our global customers. So hospitality is critical because we collect a lot of personal data. Uh, what are the changes that GDPR brings to the way we do business, and how does the 2005 regulation kind of evolve into 2000, where we are now from a 2018? So what was there earlier and how does it change? How does the GDPR policy apply to your data policy? Um, Very simple, without complicating, without getting stressed out. How do we get your hotel ready? How do you train your staff? And finally, as our business, that is the KePSLA business, revolves largely around data, we are always there to help you put together a GDPR policy and make sure that you are compliant when you're talking to your European customers. Um, Before we get to the core of the subject, it's important that we explain what we do as a business and why we want to be thought leaders in the GDPR space, because our business largely revolves around guest experience from a hotel perspective. The three products that we provide to hotels, OTAs, revolve around collecting very critical guest experience data through travel recommendation solution that we have. This is a solution that we provide to over 300 hotels around the world, which helps hotels understand the persona of the traveler and change the user generated content based on the persona so that bookings can be done much easily from travelers. We then use the same data to enhance the user experience by having a feedback management system that tracks the traveler's journey from pre-check-in while the guest is in hotel to after the guest moves out, and ensure that across the entire journey, the your guest is happy and he or she goes out to advocate positively for your hotel. And finally, that data is used as a business intelligence tool in the review intelligence platform that is your backend solution to help you understand what's right and wrong with your business. How can you quickly respond to customer reviews, and how can you positively learn from customer reviews? We've been doing this now for close to 2 years, work with about 2,500 hotels. I've put in some big brands that we work with. I can't, of course, put all of the 2,500 there. But what's most important across all of this is we are not in the reputation management space. So that makes us a business intelligence tool for hotels, which is why we have large partnerships with one of the biggest in the industry, including TripAdvisor, Google, Holiday IQ, Holiday Check, etc. So all of their data is what we receive and we use it legitimately. From a go to market perspective, we partner with larger hotel technology companies. So we have 17 integrations now. We've put some of the bigger brands out there. And then we bundle our technology with them to give it to hotels. Um, Lastly, in the last couple of years, we're very proud that we've won a whole lot of very, very important awards. The Startup 10,000 is an initiative of the NASSCOM Government of India program to encourage startups. So we were part of that. We were chosen by the government of Karnataka among the top 100 startups in Karnataka and the top 20 startups in travel. Focusrite thinks of us as India Innovator, and the Analytics Specialist magazine rates us among the top 10 emerging analytics companies in India. With that as a background, let's jump into what is this animal called GDPR. So 25th of May 2018, which is tomorrow, is a very interesting day in the life of most global online businesses. This is the day when the European Union's new data protection regulation comes into effect. The GDPR was made as a law 2 years back, and global online businesses were given ample time to build safeguards in managing customer data. This regulation, however, gained attention over the last few months after data leaks happened with the now famous Facebook and Google stories. The regulation certainly means a significant recalibration for anyone who holds or uses customer data. You need to ensure that your customer data requires explicit consent and contractual permission if your customer is European. This is very important. If your customer is European. So the GDPR is relevant for a European customer, and when the booking has happened from the European customer in a European destination. So if a booking happens on Expedia, Booking.com, etc., and the nationality is from the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation becomes relevant for that particular case. Why is GDPR important to hotels? Our hospitality industry is uniquely affected by the GDPR. Any company processing EU citizen data, whether it is in the European Union or not, must comply by GDPR or risk a fine of as much as 4% of their global turnover. So any of us taking European bookings, and I keep repeating this so that you don't get stressed out saying, I get 100 check-ins a day, of which 95 are Indians or other nationalities. Should I be worried? You don't have to worry about the 95 other nationalities. You just have to worry about the European Union citizens. How does GDPR impact your hotel? Now, the connect between hotels and data protection is high because among the travel industry, we probably collect the largest amount of of your customers' personal data, and hence all of this means so much, and that's why we need to be careful about this. The GDPR will affect many customer communication techniques like cart abandonment response, which you may have on your website. So when a customer comes to your website and he moves out after leaving his login ID password, how do you deal with that? Retargeting that you would do on websites, mailing list management, and staying in touch with returning customers. So all popular online sales tactics like discount vouchers, mailing list, personalized messages, and interest targeting all remain in place for hospitality marketing who play by the rules. And actually, GDPR now offers us an opportunity to emerge from the shadow cast by one of our most powerful friend plus enemy, what we call a frenemy, that is the OTA. For OTAs, a mailing list is a massive traffic driver. If you need to reobtain recipient consent at scale of all of their users, it would drain their business and shrink their recipient count. If they cannot find a way to make retargeting work, they will lose one of their crucial advertising channels. For individual operators or hoteliers like yourselves, this opens a window of opportunity to regain more autonomy over how you get your bookings. GDPR almost sets a reset button on the OTA hotel relationship. And I look at this as an opportunity in disguise. Also, this intervention is fortunate because there are several ways in which GDPR is quite advantageous, not threatening to small hospitality marketing. It boils down to better quality data. From 25th May, that is tomorrow, organizations can only send communication to recipients who have explicitly opted in to receive them. Pretty soon, it will seem ridiculous to imagine that we even send messages to people who didn't want to receive them. Starting now, mailing list should only comprise addresses of recipients who want to receive the mailing list and nothing else. That doesn't mean you cannot continue to offer discounts, vouchers, or benefits, but it does mean communication channel will now number more conscious recipients. Wiping unwilling subscribers from mailing list drives up the relevance and effectiveness of the remaining membership base, because suddenly you have removed all those tire kickers who found their way out of your list without even really intending to buy anything. This will make more conversions, more effective communication, and while a smaller recipient list may risk leading to fewer purchases, actual conversion rates may increase because more relevant audience are more likely to check out. This refined data set also provides newer opportunities for hoteliers to test new messages, offers, and campaigns with a great degree of accuracy. There are four key important aspects of the GDPR that needs to be considered when you're collecting data of a European traveler, and we will talk more about this in the rest of the presentation. One is, before you collect any data which is personal in nature, you need to take consent, and that consent has to have proof. Two is, there should be data portability, which means the data that's available can be moved from one place to another. There should be a right to erasure, which means if the customer says, I do not want you to hold this data, you should be able to delete it. And if a customer says that they don't want the profiling to happen, that should also be, there should be an ability to stop that. So your mailing list should be very, very clearly defined to ensure that it is only going to people who want to see the data. What I would do next is to bring in our expert, Smriti. Smriti is an expert with the European GDPR regulations. She will take you through the legal speak and the nitty-gritty of how GDPR works in. And after that, we will come in again before the question answer starts to talk to you about how can we at KePSLA help you put together your GDPR compliance. Thank you from my side, and I now pass it on to Smriti.
So, okay. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Team KePSLA and Deepak, for inviting us to speak about GDPR. As Deepak had implied earlier, GDPR is the pressing concern of the day, especially with the looming deadline of May 25th, 2018. First off, the General Data Protection Regulations, as the name suggests, are regulations and not a directive of the EU. These regulations are a lot more stringent when compared to the EU Data Protection Directive of 1995, which remained in place. For some clarity, a directive is something of a legal guideline, and the member states of the EU were expected to implement them as they saw fit, where GDPR as a regulation has been tied into the Charter of Human Rights. GDPR consists of around 99 articles. Okay, so let's delve into this topic further. So who does GDPR apply to? GDPR applies to natural persons, whatever their nationality or place of residence, whose personal data is processed and whose behavior is monitored while within the EU. all organizations who provide goods or services to the EU or possess the personal data of an EU citizen are subject to GDPR. If your hotel has personal data of any EU resident or citizen, regardless of your hotel location, GDPR definitely applies to you. So we'll have to move. So GDPR it has expanded the definition of personal data and requirements around consent. I'll just go through the definitions of personal data, sensitive personal data, personally identifiable information, and come down to the definition of consent as well. So first off, personal data. It means any data relating to an individual, whether accurate, true or not. There is no limitation on this. It could be name, email address, IP address, travel habits, anything. This is considered confidential information also. Then there is sensitive personal data, like religious beliefs, photographs, health information. Then this is also a highly classified data. Then comes personally identifiable information. This is very similar to personal data and includes names, addresses, but could include more particular information like maiden name, social security number, which are generally used for security purposes. Now let's move down to the definition of consent. Under GDPR, consent is the basis for processing any personal data. Unlike seen in the past, consent requires a positive opt-in by the individual. Silence, pre-checked boxes, or inactivity cannot and will not be accepted as consent. The reason for collecting the personal data and the manner in which it will be used needs to be made clear to the individual from whom the data is being collected. Also, keeping evidence of the content which is acquired is mandatory. Documenting this will be very, very important. And to top it off, the same consent can be withdrawn at any given point in time. Other than consent, there are 5 lawful grounds for processing personal data, but consent is currently the most popular. But at the same time, it is my understanding that GDPR discourages it by toughening the rules of obtaining consent. This is because consent is becoming unreliable and it is time consuming as well. For instance, if you're using consent to process personal data, and you then want to use the data for any other purpose, you'll need to ask for everybody's consent again. Anyone who refuses to consent or who doesn't reply must be removed from your records. Individuals are also free to withdraw their consent at any given point in time, which again means you must remove them from your records. If you don't, your organization risks disciplinary action from the relevant supervisory authority. With respect to hotels, in case you have an European employee employed with you, then you can actually attain the information through contractual obligations as well. With respect to guests, there's a possibility of legitimate interest also. Whatever lawful ground is used, hotels still need to tell individuals, whether it be an employee or a guest, what information is being collected, what it is being used for, and how long it will be retained. GDPR's data protection principles emphasize that organizations should collect data only if it's necessary for a specific purpose and retain it for only as long as it meets that purpose. Next up, let's look at the penalties. These are very interesting. The administrative fines are discretionary in nature. They're in 2 tiers. Number 1 is up to 10 million euros or 2% of your annual global turnover, whichever is higher. The second is up to 20 million euros or 4% of your annual global turnover, whichever is higher. The fines are based on the specific articles of regulation that the organization has breached. Infringements of the organization's obligations, including data security breaches, will be subject to the lower level, whereas infringements of individuals' privacy will be subject to the higher level, which is the 4%. The penalties are severe and there are guidelines to determine the penalties. But we will have to wait and watch the implementation processes. So now let's move on to how would GDPR apply to a hotel's data policy. As you can see in the current slide, this has been broken down to 6 main ways in which GDPR would apply to a hotel's data policy. First up is getting consent. As mentioned earlier, consent is key. Visitors to your website must understand exactly how you're planning to use their data, the legal basis for why you are collecting such data. Unambiguous and affirmative consent is a key part of GDPR legislation and is important for any hotel website that collects personal data to obtain specific permission to use it in the course of their business. If you are requesting consent from the customer, the user must agree to each specific purpose. For example, if you have the email address of someone who booked with your hotel, you are only allowed to market to them if they have explicitly agreed to it. Similarly, privacy notices may require rewriting to be in line with GDPR rules. Privacy policies and terms of services on your websites must be simplified and have to be revisited. Next up, accessing data. A main component of the GDPR is being fully aware of who has access to personal data that is logged and stored on your hotel's website content management system or databases. The first step is to compile a list of the individuals who have access to this data. Next, you need to understand and determine whether everyone on this list actually requires this level of access. If the answer is no, it's simple. Permission should be revoked and measures must be implemented to control future access. There must also be a fail-proof process in place for deleting data that is no longer relevant or required, as companies are not allowed to hold on to any of this information for any longer than is absolutely necessary and legally required. Next up is data accountability. Regardless of your solution provider, hotels are ultimately responsible for using tools in compliance with GDPR because primarily hotels would be considered as controllers, data controllers. In light of this, hotels should audit any external agencies that they use that have access to their data to ensure that their procedures are compliant. Once again, as the data owner, controller, the hotels are ultimately responsible for this. Even if the hotels have outsourced elements of the process, keeping a record of the measures taken to ensure all partners are acting in line with GDPR regulations is extremely important. All partners should be able to clearly explain what measures they have taken to maintain maximum security of the data shared by the hotels. We move on to data accuracy, right to correction, or it is also known as the right to rectification. Individuals have the right to demand correction of their personal data from a controller, that is the hotel. All personal data must be accurate and kept up to date. Every reasonable step must be taken to ensure that the personal data is correct in regard to the purposes for which the data is processed, and that personal data is erased or rectified without delay if it is inaccurate. Next up is data minimization. Websites should collect only the minimum amount of customer data to do the job, as well as to adhere to the storage limitation principle. This storage limitation principle hasn't been modified. It is very similar to what existed in the earlier directive. Data portability and the right to be forgotten. Under GDPR, individuals have the right to request the controller to either transfer or delete all of their information known about them and end further distribution of the data. All website users have the right to receive their personal data that was previously collected in a readable format, as well as own the right to be forgotten. This right to be forgotten grants the consumers the ability to easily have all of their data deleted from the hotel database. All of this is to be at no cost for the website user, and the timelines for these reversions or deletions are also strict with shortened response times as well. Next up, let's look at the next slide, which talks about how to make your hotel website GDPR ready. We have listed a few possible solutions that can be implemented at your end. First among them is updating your privacy policy and terms and conditions. First and foremost, your hotel's website privacy policy and terms and conditions should be updated to reference GDPR rules, regulations. In particular, you will need to be very transparent, as we had been categorically stating, and I think we will be repeating this over and over again, about what you will do with the personal information once you've collected it, and how long you will retain this information on your website and in any other database that you have. Then, ensure your website is secure. Your hotel website should have an SSL, that is a secure sockets layer certificate, to ensure that all data processing through the website is secure. If your website has an SSL certificate, the domain name will begin with a HTTPS rather than the HTTP. SSL certificates secure all of your data as it is passed from your browser to the website's servers. These certificates are not permanent and have to be renewed. In addition, you have to make sure that the certificates are issued by a certified authority like Symantec or Komodo. HTTPS or the SSL certificates do not absolve you of any other additional security measures that need to be ensured at your end, at your data processor's end. The security of the infrastructure, including servers, needs to be in place. You need to ensure the ability for people to opt out or erase their personal data. Once again, GDPR clearly states that a data subject should be able to withdraw consent as easily as they give it under the right to be forgotten clause. Controllers, that is the hotels, in this case you, must inform data subjects of the right to withdraw even before the consent is given. Update email opt-in to a default no. Include specific checkboxes for opt-in. Forms that invite users to subscribe to newsletters or indicate contact preferences must default to a no or be an unchecked opt-in box. You should also ensure that users provide consent for all ways your hotel will be utilizing their data. For instance, if a user is opting in for email newsletters, this does not mean they're opting in for email to be used for lookalike audience marketing. Ultimately, hotel must set up a specific checkbox or form of consent for each separate use of the guest data. And finally, to ensure that you're in complete GDPR compliance, it's important to implement a double opt-in process. Then, ensure the web forms identify the named parties. Your web forms must be very clear. They need to identify each party from whom the consent is being taken, the purpose for which the consent is being granted. It is important to note here that it isn't enough to include specifically defined categories of third-party organizations. We cannot say, for example, your consent form cannot just say third-party ad networks. It needs to specifically give the names of the third-party ad networks and where these ads will be appearing. Then we move on to the next slide, which is other solutions in preparation for GDPR. These would be provide easy access to download personal data. Your hotel website should provide a request form where EU website visitors or EU citizens or residents can request personal data. This could clearly state the timeline for reversion. It will provide a process in which the information will be shared for download. But this is also primarily to ensure that data is not shared with the wrong individuals or organizations. Do not keep data for longer than required. Once again, while the GDPR does not state a specified time frame that limits data storage, it's a good idea to scrub data once or twice a year to ensure that all data is accurate, up to date. Any inaccurate or incomplete information should be deleted, and the hotel is responsible for clearly stating how long the information will be stored within its privacy policy. Once again, this goes back to updating your privacy policy. Address the right to be forgotten. Like I said, it comes back over and over again. Your data strategy must allow for website visitors who previously consented to any use of their personal data to easily opt out or erase their data, as well as update their opt-in preferences. This user experience should be just as seamless as opting in and very easy to navigate on the hotel website. You need to revising legal agreements. Revisit all of your existing agreements, be it your MSLAs, your SLAs, whichever are in place with your vendors, employees, agents, to ensure that they're in compliance with GDPR. Because towards the end of the day, you are the data controller, the entity that determines the purpose and method of processing the personal data. And all of your vendors will become your data processors, the entities that process data on behalf of the data controller, which is the hotel. You need to revisit any data processing agreements that you've entered into. If you haven't already executed them, it is important to have data processing agreements in place to ensure the protection of the data. Don't forget that many partners and third parties also have access to your data. It's important for you to understand all existing contracts, who has login accesses to each of your systems storing the sensitive information. Ensure these partners and data processors are able to comply with GDPR's right to be forgotten. Under GDPR, anyone residing in the EU, not just EU citizens, can request their personal information be removed from databases in a timely fashion or know the reason as to why it can't be removed. This means that not only do you have to wipe your own system, but your data partners, which is your data processors, will be expected to do the same as well. And it will be your responsibility as a controller to ensure that that happens. Data mapping and risk identification. The GDPR recommends that companies take steps to protect all personal data, but it does not specify what those steps have to be. Instead, companies are asked to identify the risks to personal data and do what is appropriate for those risks. Encryption is one of the many options that are available to protect data, but GDPR does not specifically require encryption. A hotel must define its core principles regarding guest data as it relates to GDPR and recognizes that the data belongs to the guest and not the hotel. Hotel must outline its guidelines for collection and management of personally identifiable information or personal data. It must establish a code of conduct for its staff. The hotel must define self-regulatory audit questions. Then the mechanisms of consent management. Incentives can be a great way to encourage people to sign up for your emails. Maybe you would like to entice people by offering a discount or special offer in the body of your email so it is accessible whether they opt in, opt out, their preference. You can incentivize new subscribers in any way you like, just to be sure. Make sure that it makes sense to your hotel. This is just an example. Designating a data protection officer. It's not necessary, but it is advisable that you should designate someone to take responsibility for data protection compliance and assess where this role will actually sit within your organizational structure and governance arrangements. Even if you're not formally required, like I mentioned before, it's not required. You should consider whether you are required to formally designate a data protection officer or not. With respect to chains or large group level, a DPO is almost certainly required. But for individual hotels, the law is not very clear. You should, in all probability, seek guidance and look at your own organization to understand whether you require a data protection officer. There are many steps that hotels should take with respect to protecting personal data, from reviewing security policies, encryption, pseudonymizing data, but they should begin by adopting privacy by design. This essentially means that data protection needs to be prioritized when designing any new services or processes. For example, if a hotel was developing a new mechanism for room booking, it would have to consider the ways in which data might be exposed and apply necessary controls to mitigate each threat. It should conduct a data protection impact assessment, which would bring to the fore questions such as, are there any system vulnerabilities that are in existence? Are we exposed to criminal hackers who could exploit us? Or is it easy for employees to be misappropriating the information? On to the next slide, which is educating your staff. Hoteliers should ensure that their staff training is both up to speed, especially when it comes to GDPR compliance. Hotel staff must be aware of how to collect, access, use, and disclose personal information, as well as how to restrict access to cardholder data. GDPR applies to every hotel department, right from ownership to the front desk agents. Start by building awareness. Measures should include limit access to personal data to only those who actually need to see it. Advise employees on how to properly dispose of documents containing payment card data. Read up on relevant GDPR terms. You and your staff will definitely need to know some of these. Designate a data protection officer and ensure a data mapping is in place, even if you don't have a data protection officer. Hotels by nature manage a vast amount of personal data. Before you even begin protecting the data, you first need to understand the kind of information that you're holding, because hotels have access to not just name, birthday, email address, phone number. You could even have access to sensitive information, which would be dietary requirements of your guest. So, for example, some guest comes up and has dietary preferences. This could be considered as sensitive health information. So if you don't have regulations in place about how you're going to be protecting this information, you could be in breach of compliance. Hotels receive all of this information from different sources. It could be from a third-party booking agent. It could be from a note left at the front desk to a email marketing message, point of sales, anything. First, you need to figure out how to account for all of this data. Then you have to decide how you should be able to handle it. Actions would include deletion, redaction, encryption, quarantining, or storage in an accredited cloud-based solution where it can be accessed by your staff. In conclusion, all these are possible solutions, and to be GDPR compliant will be critical, especially considering the penalties associated with non-compliance. I'd like Deepak to take over, and thank you all for patiently listening.
Hey, thank you, Smriti. That was really, really useful. You kind of explained it so well. I think we now understand every nuance of the GDPR. Um, what I would now encourage all participants to do is ask questions if they have any, while I will just complete and conclude the event. Um, here we go. Okay, so points to kind of conclude the event. One is how have we've taken lead in being compliant with the GDPR. We'll speak briefly about that. And two is also if you need any help as hoteliers, we are happy to step in and help you. Again, please be assured there is no cost to this. We will do it because we believe that this is part of our relationship with you. So we've been working on this now for about a month, and more or less most of our processes are GDPR compliant. We have updated our terms and conditions and privacy policies. Starting in the next 2 or 3 days, you will see a clear opt-in that is present in all of our surveys, whether it's a pre-check-in survey where the mail goes to your customer before they check in, or on the app that you use so effectively, or after the post-checkout survey, it would be there. All promotional mails provide options for users to unsubscribe at any time. We were already doing this, but this is going to be more explicitly shown. We have already appointed a data protection officer at KePSLA. Harshita leads the data protection process here. So if you all have any questions, of course, her email will be out there for you. You can talk to her, write to her, and she will help you. And it's our commitment to ensure data safety and privacy of you and your customers is with us at all points in time. Having said that, I would also like to conclude by saying that while there's a lot of talk about tomorrow being a hard line on the time of sand in some sense, and if you see a lot of mails and mailers that's going around, this has almost taken a Y2K kind of proposition in terms of trend. Hoteliers should learn that this is nothing that is dangerous. You just need to stay calm and focus on strategy. Like I read somewhere, GDPR should be complied with indeed, but 25th May, which is tomorrow, is not a one-time deal. If hoteliers, operators are not compliant on day one, that's fine. They should strive to be compliant in the next few months. Because remember, data protection is a process, it's not one event. You don't do it tomorrow and stop it. It's something that you start tomorrow, and then over time you will be very strong with that. So with that, I would like to conclude the presentation. What I also now request is for Smriti to be available for questions. And let me see if there are questions that are coming in. Hold on. There is one question in chat, but I'm trying to open my chat. Yes. Okay. The question is, as a hotel analytics firm, how do you ensure GDPR compliance without having to ask for consent? I guess Google Analytics still does it, correct? How does authorities track violation and breaches? So I'd let the expert answer that. Smriti, you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure, Deepak. First and foremost, as you mentioned, they're an analytics firm. They're getting all of the data from the controller. They're, towards the end of the day, a processor. So they would have a DPA in existence, and it is the controller's responsibility to acquire the consent before the information or the data is forwarded. I hope that addresses your query.
Does it? Mr. Lopez, are you okay? Okay, we'll look forward to some more questions. Okay, thank you. Look forward to some more questions. Does verbal consent count?
So, Mr. Lopez, sorry, this is from Antonio.
Yes, not Antonio. This is Lopez, yeah.
So, GDPR requires your consent to be documented. So even if it is verbal consent, it's a matter of how you're going to go ahead and document it. You can have a phone recording as a conversation, or it could be a visual consent recording, or whatever it is. As long as it's recorded and it's in place, I don't think it makes any difference whether it's a verbal consent or a consent in writing.
Okay, good. Any more questions? Yeah, there's a question from Nivedita. She's asking, how do we market to EU hotels or customers?
That's a very interesting question. How do you market to EU hotels or customers? You will primarily require their consent to be able to market to them. If you're already marketing to them, then you're going to have to write to all of them and give them an opt-in option, like we mentioned. And if they opt in for marketing, then you can go ahead and market to them. One way of doing it is incentivizing it for them as well, so that
Right.
Yeah.
That's what you mentioned. Yeah, that's very smart. So just checking, Nivedita, are you a hotelier? Okay. You can answer that later if you can see. But yeah, if you are one, yeah, I think you should actually use this as an opportunity to begin your marketing. So if you have a database of, let's say, X number of European customers, maybe you should send them a consent mail, and like what Smriti said, add that with a discount voucher. So you kind of encourage them to consent to you. But that would be your last mail, right? If that guest says they're not interested, then too bad.
Yes, even silence is equivalent to opting out.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question then for you, Smriti. So silence means that can we send a reminder and say, hey, we sent you a mail 3 days back, or is that not allowed?
No, you can definitely send them a reminder, but once you don't hear from them, you should definitely opt out. Or maybe in the first email that you send, you can tell them we'll follow it up with a reminder in 7 days. Follow it up with a reminder, and failure to respond to the reminder would just mean that they're not interested.
Okay.
Just have it in place so that both the mails are linked and they're aware of the fact that there could be a follow-up email.
Okay. Okay. Nathan is asking, what is the best practice for obtaining consent from a customer?
I'm not very sure how to address that question, but the best practice would be to have a form of a documentation in place that can be recorded. But if you're taking an email consent, you need to have the opt-in option boxes available.
Right. Yeah.
They need to be able to take it from there and forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Best practice, I think, from a marketing perspective, Nathan, I think you should make it as seamless for your customer to opt in. So, I mean, don't make it very complex and complicated. It should be just a simple tick which says, okay, we are collecting this data. Are you okay for us to do da da da? Whatever those 4 things are, and I think that should be it. But I think I just look at it as an opportunity to, sell something and say you opt in and here's what you get. Your next holiday, you get a 15% discount on your spa or something like that. Is probably what the customer will like. I would like.
True.
Okay, one more big question. Hey, I'm from a marketing agency. While purchasing mailing lists for marketing, how do we check if they are GDPR compliant? Is there a legal issue there? Oh, yeah, this is a brilliant question. I've also been thinking about this.
So there is a major concern there. You cannot just go ahead and purchase anybody's mailing lists and write out to them. Even if you do purchase it, you need to ensure, or you need to take representation from the controller who shares the data with you that they've acquired the required consent. And when you do write to these individuals, you should first give them the option to opt out, or keep the option to opt in very explicit and open. Both need to be seamless and easy.
Yeah. So, but the question then is, the onus is on us, right? Anyways, if the mailing list is not GDPR compliant, because the mail goes from our mail with our email ID.
So that's not the way I see it. You have a contractual obligation also that is there in existence from the person whom you're purchasing all of this mailing list from.
Okay.
So you need to place that as part of their obligations, that they are GDPR compliant and they've taken the required consent. If they haven't, all you can do is send out an email and give the person the option to opt out.
Okay.
Or opt in, actually, in this case.
Okay.
So, for example, I purchase a mailing list from a marketing agency. So I enter into an agreement with the marketing agency where I go ahead and state that in compliance with GDPR regulations, you have acquired this mailing list. Primarily because these are mostly European citizens that I'm going to be mailing out to. So when I send my first email out to them, I will tell them that this is my product, this is what I'm promoting. If you're interested or if you want to continue subscription, please tick yes. If you're not interested, then you will just not reply, right? So that's what we had discussed earlier also.
Right. Oh, Antonio, so I think we would maybe talk to you more often because you're closer to all of the action being in Spain. So maybe we'll also pick up some deep insights from you as this progresses. We are a little away from action, right? So, is the opt out the same as unsubscribe?
Yes. So the opt-out option only comes into existence once somebody has actually opted in to subscribe, that is. And you need to make the opt-out option as clearly visible as you would make an opt-in option. And it has to be just as seamless and easy for you to opt out.
Right. Super. So if the questions have dried up as of now, we could conclude. However, if any of you have any questions, you can always write back to us, as well as you will probably by midday tomorrow see this entire presentation and the recording on our website. So you could go through it, you could play it with your with the rest of your team and your education and training of your team, and then always call us if you have questions, and we be happy to help you with that. Uh, Thank you very much for being part of the event. Uh, Honestly, a little overwhelmed by the number of people who attended. We did not expect this. As KePSLA, we always want to be thought leaders in the data management, data analytics space, and anything that's new and happening, we would be the first to understand that and pass it on to our customers. So thank you again for being part of this.
Thank you, Deepak, for the opportunity, for allowing us from Wazirs then to be participating. And thank you all for patiently hearing us out. And please get in touch with us with respect to any GDPR issues or queries that you may have in mind. We will be happy to help as well.
Super. Yeah. Yeah, Smriti. So yeah, you've added tremendous value to the event today. Thank you very much.